Hello and welcome to the Situation Report today. Very glad to have you joining me. This is the show where we do our best every single episode to give you the information and perspectives you need to navigate an ever-changing culture. My name is Jeremy Stolnicker. I am your host. And today we are going to talk about culture, of course, but specifically we're going to talk about the church and the church in the midst of the current cultural environment. But even beyond that, going back and understanding the influence that particularly the Protestant church has had in the United States and the process of getting to where we are today, where the church, I'm sure, still continues to have influence. I believe where God's word is present, there is influence, but not in a cultural way, not certainly like it was in the 50s, as we'll talk about in this interview, and at other times in our history. Very grateful to have on today with me Aaron Renn. Aaron is a writer and consultant. He is the co-founder and senior fellow at American Reformer, which we've talked about many, many times. And he spends a lot of time writing about and talking about that is the church, and so many other issues. Very grateful to have him on, and I trust that this conversation will be a help to you. Aaron Renn, thank you for joining me today. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. We were just talking before we started. There are a lot of different directions we can go, but some exciting topics. But let's start with your background. It sounds funny to say, where'd you come from, right? But how does one get into the work that you're doing now and writing about and talking about the things that you are addressing, at this stage in your life?
Sure. Well, my background actually is important to this because I have a foot in both of sort of the camps that have been causing a lot of conflict with each other in the evangelical world. But I grew up in rural southern Indiana, and then after college, moved off to Chicago and worked 3 different careers. First career was management consulting. I was with Accenture for about 15 years, helping corporations, big companies to adapt to business and technological change. Then I switched and started doing similar type work, but really focused on cities and how to help cities, especially Midwestern and sort of Rust Belt cities, successfully adapt. So I was living in New York City with that. I was a senior fellow with the Manhattan Institute, which is a think tank there. And then I sort of pivoted again into a third thing, which is a little bit the intersection of the future of the evangelical world with the why don't men go to church problem.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's really kind of where I'm focusing my efforts. And so I have a mix of kind of urban and rural in my background, and I've worked on a number of areas, but it's really all the same sort of tools and techniques, if you will.
What's your faith background personally? How did you come into relationship with Christ?
So I was raised, I was actually baptized Catholic. I'm from Catholic peasant stock on both sides of my family. But my mother got very involved in the Catholic charismatic renewal movement in the 70s, ended up leaving the Catholic Church, and I was actually raised in a rural Assemblies of God church.
No kidding.
And, it's a long story, but today, since I've lived in cities, I essentially attend Presbyterian churches.
That's interesting, that transition from Catholic to Assemblies of God and then Presbyterian, right? I mean, those are really 3 very different.
Right. Now, in fairness, I really was too young to remember anything of the Catholic Church. I didn't even make it to First Communion. So.
Sure. So it's just back there in your background. Yeah. Okay, so I'm interested in this, from Assemblies of God to Presbyterian. What precipitated or what caused that shift in your attendance?
Well, what I would say is Protestantism in the United States has always been divided on socioeconomic and status grounds, as well as ethnically and even racial stratifications, of course, as you know. So there's some, the quip would be something along the line of, the average American, and there's variations of this depending on who said it. The average American starts out as the son of a Baptist farmer, and they become a Methodist as soon as they get their first white-collar job. Then they become a Presbyterian when they get their first promotion, And when they make the board of directors, they become an Episcopalian. So it's historically not been uncommon for people to change denominations as they move up in society. But the fact is, there was sort of a gap in there after I went off to college where I really was not a Christian at all, and really kind of reconnected with faith when I was living in Chicago and doing urban policy work. And, the pastor I was talking to at the time, who was actually in essentially non-denominational Baptist type environment, said, "Oh, you research cities, you should look at Tim Keller."
Yeah.
And so he connected me with Tim Keller's work. And I'm like, wow, this is the first person I've ever heard who is a pastor who sounds like he knows what he's talking about. And he's actually talking about cities in ways that I recognize from my own work was actually accurate.
Yeah.
And so probably that was the gateway to Presbyterianism, like so many others.
It's interesting. There's I don't know if the argument is the right word. Sometimes when all you're focused on is kind of one thing, you feel like everybody in the world is talking about it, and they're not. But there is this discussion about, and you're probably familiar with this, cessationism versus continuation or continuism, whatever phrase is used in that.
Right.
What's interesting is, so I grew up independent Baptist, and throughout my life, kind of that world has always held to a cessation view.
Yeah.
And then if you're charismatic, you hold to a different view. Well, now there's this almost confluence, right, where people who have long held to one particular view of the work of the Holy Spirit are now moving not from their denominational roots or historical denominational roots, but changing their views into something that is completely different than where they came from. And it's just a really interesting thing to watch. That's not I'm not offering an opinion there other than just it's really interesting to watch this shift take place.
Well, it's a time of realignment in our society across a whole variety of domains. I mean, what I would say is, although I'm not in the Assemblies of God anymore, I have very high regard for the Pentecostals, and particularly for their ability to reach some of the toughest cases in our, society. Sure. So the church I grew up in is still there. I still go there whenever I go back and, visit my mother, and great ministry to people who are coming out of drug addiction, people who are coming out of jails. We have halfway house ministry. Yep. The chaplain of the county jail is there. People who, weren't involved maybe in that kind of activity, but they were a victim of sexual abuse or something like that. Those are people that kind of Pentecostal churches do a great job of reaching. I think in ways that some of the more high-tone denominations do not. I view the denominations similarly, maybe to the gifts of the Spirit. Maybe that's not a biblical thing. I don't know, but the idea is not everybody has the same gift. I think not every denomination has the same gift, but different ones are good at different things.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I'd like to hope that ultimately, God will sort of reconcile the church and bring back greater unity, and these things will sort of rebound to the greater glory, as it were. But right now, these different groups, are some people are better at different things, and we can't just put I don't think one box. If the whole world were Presbyterian, there would be a lot of things we wouldn't be doing, and a lot of people we wouldn't be reaching.
It's interesting to hear you say that. It's good to hear you say that. I have this thought kind of privately a lot that really God uses all of us, and that can get really out of whack, right? I mean, the gospel is fixed. There aren't various paths to God. That's not what I'm saying, but yeah, the approaches, even the understanding of some passages and some theological positions, God uses, it seems to me at least, people on all ends of those spectrums, and it's been interesting to watch that. And as I've gotten older, trying to reconcile that in my own mind and heart, is like, wow, these people that I once believed probably didn't even read their Bible. God is using them in an amazing way, and then these people that hold different beliefs on the end times or some other issue, wow, God's really using them in some unique ways too. And so it's been a really interesting thing to watch, and I think very good for me to see. We were talking before we started about the three worlds of evangelicalism and your understanding of kind of the church historically, but where it's going as well. Can you talk to that for a little bit?
Sure. That's the thing I've become best known for. I originally developed this framework back in 2014, published an initial version of it in 2017. Then I sort of updated it, and it was in First Things magazine in the February 22 edition. It's called The Three Worlds of Evangelicalism. And it actually ended up being the most read article of the year out of the magazine that year. And in fact, I'll tell you, I have a book coming out that's sort of an expansion of it in January. It's called Life in the Negative World. It's on Zondervan, so I'm looking forward to that. But here's the key. If you go back to the 1950s, that was the high watermark of church attendance in the United States. About half of all the people in the country attended church each week. And while we didn't have essentially a formally established religion in the United States, there was a sort of soft institutionalization of a sort of generic Protestantism at that time. We still had prayer in schools, you may recall. Yeah. There's a famous picture you see people post it to Twitter. It's a black and white photo of New York City in its Easter, and some of the skyscrapers have crosses from the lights onto the window. Yeah. That was taken in the 1950s. And, you know, we were sort of embracing a kind of a Christian identity for the country in the 50s, partially as a result of our battle against communism in the Cold War. So In God We Trust was like added to our money in the 50s, and Under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in the 50s. And so this was really like America as sort of this avatar of a sort of, again, generic Protestant nation. Well, starting in the 1960s, that started to go into decline. Christian church attendance started to go into decline. The status of Christianity started to go into decline. And, you know, the kind of moral norms of Christianity began to be called into question. And you can date the start of this to various places. You know, let's just pick the Kennedy assassination. Maybe is the place to start after the Kennedy assassination. Yep. And this, you know, we've been in this essentially period of decline for Christianity ever since. It's not going necessarily in a straight line, just like the stock market moved. There's some zigs and some zags, but it's basically been going down. And I divide this period of decline from, say, 1964 to the present into three different phases or worlds that I call the positive, the neutral, and the negative world. The positive world is from 1964 to 1994. And this is a period of decline for Christianity. I want to make that clear. All is not going well. At the same time, Christianity is still basically seen positively. To be known as a good church-going man makes people want to hire you, makes you seem like an upstanding member of society, and Christian moral norms are still the basic moral norms of society. Around 1994, we had a first tipping point, and we enter what I call the neutral world, which goes from 94 to 2014, in which Christianity is no longer seen as a positive, but it's not really seen as a negative yet either. It's sort of just one more lifestyle choice among many in a pluralistic public square. Right. So we might meet, you know, I'll say I'm a Christian, you say, great, I'm a vegan, let's talk, okay?
Right.
Then in 2014 or so, we had a second tipping point and enter what I call the negative world, where for the first time in the 400-year history of America, elite culture, official societies sort of sees Christianity negatively. To be known as a Bible-believing Christian does not help you get a job at Goldman Sachs or Google, right? Quite the opposite. Right. And, you know, Christian moral norms are expressly repudiated by society and in many cases seen as the greatest threat to the new moral order. And so this new era that we find ourselves, this negative world era, really is completely unprecedented for Christians in America. It's very disconcerting. And if just one example, the paradigmatic organization of the positive world, in my view, is moral majority, the moral majority. Yep. Just the very name moral majority is only possible in a positive world. Sure. Now, it may have not even been true then, but it was at least plausible to claim we represent the moral majority. Right. No one could ever claim that today. It's quite a change. And so I think a lot of what we see in terms of the dissensions and the debates within evangelicalism itself, a lot of it is a result of this shift to the negative world, which is really kind of the ground is shifted under a lot of people. And it's causing, as we said, a lot of realignments, a lot of change, etc.
What has caused us to move into this particular phase? I think coming out of the 60s and into the 70s, there was so much happening culturally. People were, you know, kind of the mores or cultural norms were shifting so dramatically. The church shifted with them, but out of that, you see things like the Jesus movement, which there's been a lot of talk even about that again. The moral majority came out of that in the 70s. So all of these things happened. Ronald Reagan came out of all of that. So you have this crazy upheaval, and then you have kind of the pushback. And we see a working of God, and we see conservatism, and we see all of these things then take root. But where we are now is so far from that. How do we, when we cross that line or that, move into that new phase, where did that come from? Or what was the catalyst for that? Or was that just the slow, steady slide and one day we woke up and here we were?
Well, there are a lot of factors that contributed to it. I don't know that we could ever say scientifically.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
But even again, if you go back to the 1950s, we had what they called the Protestant establishment. You always hear about WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. I mean, they really dominated the country. And even in the 50s, if you were Jewish or Catholic, you probably couldn't join certain country clubs. You maybe couldn't live in certain neighborhoods. So it really was a sort of, up until the 50s, it really was sort of a Protestant normative society. And so as long as there was this establishment, it seems unlikely to me that they would have allowed the country to become sort of anti-Christian, because that would have destroyed part of the boundary marker of their community. Yeah. So the collapse of the establishment is one. Obviously, the 60s cultural revolutions were another factor. The sexual revolution, which played out especially into the 70s, things like second wave feminism, etc., had a big impact on it. I think a very important event was the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War. Again, with godless atheism, communism, represented by the other side, we by default became the party of religion, Christianity, etc. So as long as the Cold War was going on, we couldn't really abandon Christian faith in the country. So 1989 was definitely, an important year. And there's a lot of other things. We've had tremendous centralization of corporate life in the country, consolidation of corporations, deregulations, globalization, immigration, the digitization of life that now gives these companies a lot. So there's a lot of things going on.
Right.
But if you look at what happened, it really, when you look at the negative world specifically, there's a lot of ways you could date it. Yeah, there's a leftist commentator named Matthew Iglesias that he said 2014 is when the Great Awakening happened, and so we really started to see, this discourse around race shift in Obama's second term. A lot of this stuff happened in Obama's second term. So I think that this whole sort of woke arising, if you will, on race, which is well documented in so many things, is one major cultural shift that happened in there. And then, of course, the changes with regards to gay marriage were obviously huge. Rick Warren, I believe, prayed at Obama's first inauguration.
That's right, yeah.
At his second inauguration, I can't remember the gentleman who was supposed to pray. There was another kind of big anodyne evangelical figure who was supposed to pray, but was forced to withdraw after there was controversy about his stance on sexuality.
Right.
So and obviously Obergefell was in 2015. So that was really the seminal event in terms of really changing the entire legal regime of the country. Yeah. In a lot of ways. So I mean, if you go back to 2008, I think it was 2008. California, the bluest state in the country, California, by popular vote, voted to pass a constitutional amendment banning gay marriage.
Yeah, Prop 8. Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy to think that was 2008 in California.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things were really shifted, I think, on both sexuality and race around that time. We sort of saw something of a collapse of conservatism in America that I don't think has been fully documented, and somebody really needs to go do it, because I think what we see is the rise of Donald Trump in 2015 into 2015 really, I think, really revealed that sort of the Republican Party and conservatism had become something of a hollow shell. Yeah. Certainly the Bush admin and the wars on Afghanistan and Iraq and the numerous missteps of the Bush administration, Abu Ghraib, all of those things really played an enormous role in doing that, I think, as well. And so, really, I think there was also, a lot of these leftist gains came in the wake of a sort of the failures of the Bush administration and a sort of hollowed out conservatism, as well. So I think there was a lot going on, but so there was sort of this trend in the background, if you will.
Yep.
But there are also all these little things. Again, it wasn't just a straight line. There's some of these bigger moments and some of the slower moments, but it didn't just happen in 2014. I mean, it goes back a long way. I mean, there's a book that got huge press, even though not that many people read it because it's dense and 900 pages long, called A Secular Age by a Canadian philosopher, Charles Taylor. And one of the great accounts of secularization, but basically his narrative is sort of like it all started in declining, back before the Protestant Reformation. This secularization is the process of the outworking of these tectonic forces going back hundreds of years. And so you could tell a very, very long story of secularization, the Enlightenment and all of that. But however you want to slice it, I think it's it's not just something that happened overnight. Again, I tend to look at it as mostly a product of something going back to the 1960s.
When you look at, I'll use the word failures or the failings of the church, and you mentioned the moral majority and conservatives, not the movement, but individuals within the conservative movement. So you see churches really with a lot of authority, a lot of influence, certainly large platforms as such in the 70s, they're different than they are today. But then these leaders failing morally and churches getting wrapped up in financial scandal and all of those things. And you see, the PTL scandals and we can name all of those names. And you see what happened with so many in the moral majority and then coming into even the Falwell family and conservatives. So all of these moral failings and all of these ethical failings, what impact, if any, did those have on kind of the rejection of Christianity, or at least the influence of Christianity today? I think a lot of people point to that as the reason. How much of an impact did those actually have, or were those just that's the reason we can't do that anymore? Or did it really bring us to this place?
Well, I think you could make an argument that the condition of the church in America may have triggered, God's judgment against it in some way. Don't forget the Catholic abuse scandals, other things. I mean, there's like a lot going on. We did, we have. I think it is important to say we have not had our own house put in order. Right. Now, again, is that true for sure? I'm not saying it. I'm not saying that in a, the preacher up there, God's judgment's going to fall. But we can't discount. I mean, I think the reality is that the Bible is clear that, man's sin does bring God's judgment, and that when there is like a judgment that comes upon the land or something bad happens on the land, one of the, the things that people do in the Old Testament, what do? They fast, they look to repent, they turn to God. Right. They see it as a sign they should be turning to God with more intensity, whatever's going on. And so I think we could certainly look at it that way. And now having said that, I don't think that the, behaviors of these people are the, impetus to change in secular society. I think it's very convenient for people to say, oh, you want to blame this person, blame that. Oh, if only you guys weren't such hypocrites. Right. If only that. I mean, and, that's a, it's interesting. Russell Moore just made a statement very much like that at the Atlantic Festival. So, the Atlantic magazine has this big shindig. They ask him, do you think, culture hates Americans? And he says something to the effect of, I don't think culture, do you think American culture hates Christianity? It's like, no, I don't think that they hate, Christianity so much as they hate people who call themselves Christian acting in a non-Christian way. So I think that, that's something that you hear people float that, but I don't think that is the fundamental cause of a lot of this stuff. If you go back to the book, The Sexual Revolution by Wilhelm Reich, I believe was written in the 1930s, and has essentially envisions a radical overturning of the family and sexual norms and all that stuff. And he wasn't per se reacting against Christianity. He was a communist, and he thought that this was part of the communist project. And of course, it was originally part of the communist project. When the Soviet Union became communist, they sort of tried some of this stuff, and then they backed off and went back to a more bourgeois. So this guy's like, no, we have to finish the project of sort of communist liberation. But he wasn't reacting to hypocrisy, in the church. Nor can you say, I don't see it.
Yeah.
And especially in the intellectual leadership of many of the ideas. I think that's a convenient thing to say. When answering surveys. It's sort of like, in the cities world, people always used to say, why don't people go downtown? Oh, it's because there's no parking. That's something you say when there's nothing there that you want.
Right. You don't want to go downtown. Yeah.
When it's your kids wanting to go to Disney World, all of a sudden expensive prices having to park, 2 miles away, and all of a sudden doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
Because there's something you want.
Yeah.
So it's like this. I think those things are fundamentally excuses at the societal level, which is not to say that for certain individuals who may have been, found themselves in a very bad church situation or suffered some, abuse that the church perpetrated or should have done something about, there aren't individual cases where that's true. But I don't believe that's the explanation for society.
So then that leads to this question, which is, what's the future of the church? So we could say that those things were happening, kind of next to this secular revolution or secular enlightenment or whatever it was that was taking place. So it's happening next to it. It becomes a convenient thing to point at and blame. However, we do believe the church should have an influence on society and culture and even the way that, politicians vote and the things that they do. And we've lost a lot of that. Some of that, I think, is because the church is even confused about things like gender and things, these other more cultural or social issues we're talking about. Even the church is often confused about those. But what's the future then? So what does the church do as society continues to pursue this humanistic, secular, not only viewpoint or philosophy of life, but living that out? What does the church do in the midst of that? Where do we go from here?
Yes, that's a great question. And it's a very uncertain time. And I believe that we have to have a sort of exploration mindset because we are in this sort of uncharted territory. Again, maybe since the time of Constantine, we haven't been in a situation, right, where, kind of the church was that out of favor in society. So this idea that we'll just cook up a strategy in the world, things are changing all the time. We don't know what's going to happen in America, in culture, etc. So I think we need to maybe be a little bit like, the Hebrews that crossed the Jordan into the promised land after wandering the desert for 40 years. There's a great line in Joshua, I believe it is, where he says, follow the ark as you cross the Jordan because you have not been this way before. So we haven't been this way before. And we're going to be entering kind of like them. We're entering into this unknown. And so I sort of, in my book, I don't think there's like a simple one-size-fits-all answer.
Yeah, right.
And I think, different people, as a result of different good faith analyses of what's going on in the world, are going to come to very different conclusions about what to do as well. And so I sort of, in my forthcoming book, I spent about a quarter of the time talking about the three worlds and the different frameworks and what's going on inside evangelicalism. And then the last 75% is really ideas for what to do about it, really across three dimensions, which I call the personal, the institutional, and the missional.
That's good.
So I sort of think personally, as individual Christians, we need to make a decision to be more all in on our faith, right? The era where you can kind of have this kind of lukewarm spiritual life. It's going to be a lot harder because you're going to have to count the cost a lot more because there might be a cost in a way that previously there was not per se a cost to be paid for many people. People always say American Christians aren't suffering persecution, and I would agree, right? We're not suffering what Christians in China or North Korea are, or even what that Pastor Andrew Brunson went through in a Turkish prison for 3 years. And so, but anyhow, as I recall, all the things Paul in the Bible talked about that happened to him, beaten with rods, stoned, shipwrecked, all these things. Nobody ever took away his ability to make a living for himself as a tent maker. But that is a type of pressure that you find here. So it's a more subtle, indirect pressure. Yeah. And so I think that let's not sell our own situation short either. So I think we have to be very much more serious about our faith. We need to just cultivate excellence in every area of our lives, because the degree of difficulty dial on life has gone up in America. Yep. So you want to get married and have a family that lasts, your marriage will last, and raise kids in the faith. Yeah. That's hard today. It is really hard. And so we need to be on our game like that in every aspect of our life. Then I talk about, that we should be looking to structure ourselves to be more resilient just in the choices that we make, career decisions, et cetera. In terms of institutions, again, I think all those things you mentioned are right on. We need to have more trustworthy institutions. We need to be people of integrity in every sense of the word. Yep. We need to be tending to our own community strength. This is where I feel like, a little bit what you were saying is a traditional attitude. We want to have an outward-facing mission. We want to reach the lost, help drug addicts. We have tended to assume that all the mission is outside the church. Yeah. But I think increasingly we're going to have more mission inside the church because equipping people to live we're going to have to build the strength of our own communities in the way that other religious minorities have had to do. And then with that, I think we need to, that's a couple ideas. There's some more in there. And then with mission, I really think that we need to be a light into the world, a light of truth, and really just be people who bear witness to the truth. I think that's something that can be attractive to people. And the example I use, if you go back to, I don't like all of his new directions per se, but if you go back to Jordan Peterson circa 2018, of course, I got interested in men in the church. I'm like, why are men turning to Jordan Peterson? Yeah. There's a famous interview of Jordan Peterson on Channel 4 in the UK, which is one of the big UK state broadcasters. Yep. Where it's like 15, 20 minutes of him being attacked by this hostile female interviewer who doesn't like him. Right. This is one of the two things that made Jordan Peterson famous.
Yeah,
the other was
I've seen this a few times, yeah.
I mean, millions and millions of people. Yeah. And I think that is such a model of, he's very, dare I say, winsome. He's sitting there. He's not being combative. He's standing his ground. Mm-hmm. He has deep expertise in what he's saying. He's grounded in facts. And he says things like, men and women are not the same. Right. And things like that. Right. And, his willingness to say things like, men and women are not the same. There are actually substantive differences between the two sexes. Oh, and I'm not going to use these pronouns because you're forcing me to, that are just made up. Yeah. Just those two little things made that guy a hero to people. And I think too often, the church is trying to nuance everything. Yeah. And I think what I love about that interview is it shows that you don't need to be a jerk and you don't need to be a provocateur in order to do that. Mm. You can just sit there calmly, winsomely, but firmly, hold your ground, speak the truth, state your frame. And so I think those sorts of things. That's good. I think that sort of thing is like, look at people coming to him because people are looking for that because we're increasingly in our society required to affirm things that are absolutely absurd. Like there's no such thing as biological sex. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's like on the, and so you're supposed to say that like, everybody will say that with and affirm that that's true, and they know that it's crazy. They're just doing it because they're we've never had a more cowardly leadership class in America than we do today. Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to believe how little courage these people have, even wealthy people, and that's why the people who have courage stand out. And unfortunately, in this environment, many of the people who are willing to stand out are just sort of like trolls. And, or they adopt the Donald Trump style. Right. Yeah. Which is not, which I think is, it may work for certain people, but the fact is that turns a lot of people off. That's not the norm. And so I do think that Jordan Peterson Channel 4 interview is something of a model, I think, for public engagement. Yeah, that's good. And I like that you break that down into three areas. I think it's easy for us as even Christians to say, well, the church needs to fix itself, right? Mm-hmm. Or our politicians or whatever, the institutions need to get this right. Meanwhile, we have so many issues in our own homes with our own marriages and our own kids and our own practice of faith that has to start there and work from there.
I feel like, and I've said this before, as difficult as the day we're living through is, and particularly for Christians, and we look off to the horizon not knowing where that's going to, where we're going to be, I think there's a lot of good that's come out of this as well, because we can no longer hide behind kind of the shroud of this is the cultural norm and it's okay to be a Christian and people will accept you if you are. And this is a time where a lot of people have really been pushed into the place where they have to make decisions for themselves and for their families. And what are we going to do? And do we believe what we've been saying we believe? And
Right.
and trying to live that out authentically. I don't personally believe this has to be a bad thing for the Christian community and for churches. I think this can be a great inflection point for us to really live out what we've said for a lot of times, a long time, that we believe.
I agree. And I think this, going back to the very beginning of our discussion, one of the things that I like about Presbyterianism in a sort of the Reformed tradition is this idea of a very high view of God's sovereignty.
Yeah.
And I do think if you're engaging in this crazy world and all this stuff is going on around, I think we had to ask ourselves basically a fundamental question, who is actually, is God in charge? Or is there's nobody, or is there nobody in charge?
Right.
And
That's
we're
right.
kind of on our own. And so I think it does cause you to think about those things and a lot of things like that. And so I think sometimes we sort of we operate completely in this, what Charles Taylor calls the immanent frame. It's like there is no supernatural dimension to the world.
Right.
Maybe you go to heaven when you die, but when you're down here, you're on your own.
Yeah, you're on your own.
So
figure it
but
out.
I don't. So I think that's one of the things that we need to. I think ask ourselves: do we really believe God is in charge? And what do we think about that?
Yep.
And do we believe it?
That's good.
It's an important one.
Man, there's so much there. Talk about your books, if you wouldn't mind, and where people can follow you and get a hold of those.
Sure. So again, the book's called Life in the Negative World. It's out at the end of January on Zondervan. You can order it on Amazon right now. It's available for pre-order. The best way to keep up with all of my content is at aaronrenn.com, AARONRENN.com. It's newsletter. You can sign up for it there, and I always send out everything. Got some good stuff there. I just had an interview with Senator Marco Rubio, had him on my podcast, talking about his new report on work. Just had a piece in the Wall Street Journal on why men are turning to these online influencers instead of church. I'm working on that. I want us to get more men in the church. I think getting things right on gender is one of the things we really have to do in an age where, we're entering a post-familial age where people aren't getting married, they aren't having kids. There's a lot of frustrated people. But sign up for the newsletter, and you'll find everything there in the book is Life in the Negative World.
That's awesome. Aaron Renn, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate the conversation, and look forward to talking again. I would love to spend some time really diving down, going deep on, the issues with men and why it is that Christian men are going to influencers and some of these other, things that you've written on and talk about. So look forward to next time, but thank you for this time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Just when you thought it couldn't get any better, Mike Lindell with MyPillow is launching the MyPillow 2.0. When Mike invented MyPillow, it had everything you could ever want in a pillow. Now, nearly 20 years later, he discovered a new technology that makes it even better. The MyPillow 2.0 has the patented adjustable fill of the original MyPillow, and now with a brand new fabric that is made with a temperature regulating thread. The MyPillow 2.0 is the softest, smoothest, and coolest pillow you'll ever own. For our exclusive listeners, the MyPillow 2.0 is buy one, get one free offer with promo code SITREP. MyPillow 2.0 temperature regulating technology is 100% made in the USA and comes with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. Just go to MyPillow.com and click on the radio listener square to buy the one, get one free offer. Enter promo code SITREP or call 800-870-0283 to get your MyPillow 2.0 now. Many of our veterans feel they need to fight their battles alone. This self-isolation has led to the staggering statistic of more than 20 veterans taking their lives every day. The mission of Mighty Oaks is to eradicate the veteran suicide epidemic and help our warriors change their legacies. We've been able to help over 4,000 veterans and first responders by equipping them with the tools they need to live the lives they were created to live. Our faith-based, peer-to-peer approach has one of the highest success rates of any program available today, offering hope and understanding to those who need it most. By aligning their lives to biblical principles, these men and women are able to lead their families, their communities, and our nation. It's your generosity that can make a difference in the lives of the men and women who have fought for our country and our freedoms. Now that they're home, don't let them fight alone. Learn more at mightyoaksprograms.org. Thankful for that conversation with Aaron. Please go and check out his website, aaronrenn.com, aaronrenn.com. You can sign up for his newsletter. And he is having the right conversations with the right people, asking the right questions. And as you, I'm sure, discerned from that conversation, goes deep on these issues, understands them, and is so good at explaining them in a way that we can get a hold of. So please go and check that out. That would be fantastic. Order his new book, and you'll be blessed by that. Really appreciate you watching and or listening. If you have not yet subscribed to this show, please do that right now. Go ahead and subscribe. And once you've subscribed, you can then share this out with others. That would be fantastic. Again, thank you for joining today, and I look forward to talking to you next time.